From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Shari. We love you very much. Now, as you know, there are many opportunities to watch our great opinion primetime lineup. It starts at 5 o'clock and goes all the way through to Reader at 11. And I love seeing my colleagues at their absolute best, which is virtually every night. They all put an awful lot of hard work into their shows and try to come up with not just interesting angles, but certainly try to move the ball forward, whatever it happens to be. And sometimes that means that, yes, there will be a topic that pops up where we'll all kind of have a say on it. So I am not at all naive to the idea that sometimes once we get to this point in the night, that you have perhaps seen other stories on other shows. Now, that's why we always try to come up with a slightly different angle on things, and you seem to respond. But there really is no other angle today, and we worked as hard as we possibly could to find one, on the Prime Minister lying about China. Now, I agree with all of my colleagues and all of the guests who have concluded what is so damn obvious, that yet again this bloke lies. Now, it all started with the Channel 9 story a couple of nights ago that we were able to bring you after the 6 p.m. news about China taking action against an Australian helicopter. If the Australian helicopter pilot wasn't fast enough, then they would have been blown out of the sky, and we'd be talking about something incredibly serious. But again, like everyone, I've got to just show you sometimes things for what they are. No spin, no difference, no new angle. The Prime Minister lied. He lies so often that it's a daily occurrence, but his office and the supporters in the media try to pretend that it is only Sky News Primetime that seems to notice. Well, let's all yet again see how the bloke lied. Here he was yesterday in Rockhampton saying that they'd learnt their lesson from when they tried to hide the last time China had an incident with the Australian Defence Force. This was, of course, back in APEC last year, where despite the fact he could have seen the Chinese president in the eye and said, mate, over here, don't do it, stop it. Instead, nothing was said. They probably sent a fax to a number hoping that it wasn't connected. A bit like when you ring that person that you don't really want to talk to and you're hoping for a voicemail. That's the level of interaction when it comes to unpleasantness between the Australian government and their new mates in China. Now, this is what the Prime Minister tried to make you believe.
We have made very strong representations at every level to China about this incident, which we regard as unprofessional and unacceptable. One of the things that had broken down over a period of time was any dialogue. And that's why we've used all of those avenues of communication to make our position on this incident very clear.
Every level. Not true. Now, every level includes leader to leader. That didn't happen. The reporting of Andrew Clennell was the one who confirmed what we already knew. He wasn't telling the truth yesterday, but he thought no one would find out. A bit like how they never told us this incident happened on Saturday. It was only when Andrew Probyn at Channel 9 approached the Defence Minister that we got to know anything about it. If something as serious as this takes place, you would expect within seconds of it happening that the officials are told in Canberra, and we'll give them a day or so, but the public should know virtually straight away as well. Because when it comes to the safety of the people who defend the country, no exceptions, no weasel words. When it's this dangerous, you tell the people responsible to stop. Or your meeting to Canberra is off in a few weeks' time. Again, the reporting from Andrew Clennell, which proves the Prime Minister is yet again lying.
Well, Sky News can reveal there's been no attempt by any minister in the Albanese government, let alone the Prime Minister, to have a conversation with the Chinese government about this. Government sources have told me that the contact that has occurred has been between the Defence Forces, Defence official to Defence official, and the Foreign Affairs Department to Foreign Affairs Department. So the stance of the Albanese government at the moment is now to await a formal and official response from the Chinese government, after which there might be that ministerial representation.
Again, we have waited till voicemail. We've called when we know the person is busy. We've sent the email to an old address. We've sent a fax to a number that doesn't exist anymore. That's how urgent they take it. When confronted about it, the Prime Minister said, anything but the obvious.
Well, the ambassador has already been spoken to about this issue, as has people in Beijing. This is unacceptable and it was unprofessional. The explanation given overnight by Chinese authorities does not satisfy any change to the position that we've taken. Indeed,
sweep it under the rug, pretend it doesn't happen, Jedi mind trick, it's not as serious as it seems. No, I don't want to go to war with China. I don't want Australia to get into a position where it is in that position. But let's also not pretend that they haven't shined lasers in our pilots' eyes. They haven't already sent metal shavings into our planes. They haven't already had spy ships off the coast of Australia. They haven't already hacked the Australian Parliament. They haven't already hacked ASIO. Seriously. For their part, China, well, of course, they know who they're playing with here. The handsome little boy who doesn't want to upset them.
What truly happened was an Australian military aircraft deliberately flew within close range of China's airspace in a provocative move that endangers China's maritime and air security.
Now, next month, the Chinese Premier, the one below the President, is coming here to Australia. It's part of the resetting of relationships after Australia did that horrible, evil act of war and asked China to explain what happened with a global pandemic that ended up killing millions of people and is killing thousands of people in Australia to this day. Now, the response of the government, rather than this garbage that they're serving up, should be apologise or you're not welcome next month. Oh, but we couldn't possibly do that. Because what would China do in retaliation when they are in the wrong, when they almost killed members of our Defence Force on the helicopter? Oh, taxes on this and tariffs on that. And an awful lot of people who understandably want to make money in tough times always want us to choose the dollar over decency. Oh, we've got to have the relationship with China. They're way bigger. It's about whether you stand up for yourself. And when we've got a liar like this bloke telling us about a story the government didn't tell anyone, media discovered the story, just like the last time the bloke was face to face with the Chinese leader and he didn't have the stones to talk about it then. Because you know and I know, the money works. The pockets of voters work in this Prime Minister's favour. But you have to be willing to risk those things when a country almost kills members of your Defence Force, let alone injures them last year in the Sona attack. So unless China says sorry, which they won't, why should we be rolling out the carpet for the people who do this? We'll be debating this tonight with Stephen Conroy and Bronwyn Bishop. But there's plenty of other things that you haven't heard about on other shows, so let's get to those straight away. Now, the Prime Minister is in Perth in Western Australia, has been there today. I don't know whether he's spending the night or he'll be back doing something else tomorrow. Now, again, this bloke who claims, a new passionate form of politics, he's got the stones to take on all the big and difficult things. Well, he doesn't have them to look a lady in the eye who was bashed within an inch of her life. Now, the police believe that one of the people who is accused of that alleged assault is somebody who never should have been out of immigration detention. And when they came out of immigration detention, they should have had an ankle bracelet. But as the ABC, you know, that far right-wing joint, the ABC has reported, the very committee that made the decision is not arm's length from government. That was yesterday's lie that we proved. Instead, it's related back to the minister, and the minister, well, he either was not informed, which meant he's incompetent, or he does know what's going on and he lied, which means he's got to go. So there was great questioning today from the people who were in the media corps in Perth. Now, because it's a Perth story and the parochial angle, they went hard, but good on them for doing it. Because the Prime Minister wants to pretend that's last week's story. And as we know, a lie a day, change the subject, new distraction, and most of the media will follow on. Well, good on the people in Perth who said, sorry, Prime Minister, your government made the mistakes that opened up the opportunity for what police now believe to be the alleged behaviour of a person who should have never been granted bail when he had gone before courts, even after he came out as a result of the High Court decision. Here's one of the questions from the pack in Perth.
While you're here in WA, will you take the opportunity to apologise to Nanette Simons?
You can almost hear the gulp from the other side of the country. Oh, they're going to ask me about that? That's last week's story. Now, the Prime Minister is in charge of the Prime Minister's diary. If the Prime Minister wanted to, he could go face-to-face or make a phone call or meet them somewhere. He can do it with cameras, without cameras. Oh, no, but the Minister's already called. But because we saw her end of the phone call on television, the government now is just going to wipe its hands and pretend she doesn't exist. One of the local MPs has already rung her. Well, what about the Prime Minister? Well, here was his answer.
My heart goes out. No one should be the subject of violence such as Nanette Simons had to put up with. I'm not currently scheduled to visit Nanette Simons. My heart goes out to Nanette Simons. This is a terrible tragedy.
See, this bloke, the reason he kept saying her name was because, of course, previously when he'd been asked, he didn't use her name. So he thinks the great step forward is, I know her name. Now, we all know that he doesn't know her name. He double-checked the name, and then that was the only bit that got into his head, so repeat. Now, people can see this for what it is. It's a bloke who is very comfortable with people who agree with him or are getting money off him, but very uncomfortable when he has to come face-to-face with the consequences of his own government's failures. He hates it. We all know he's got a glass jaw. We all know he's got an ego the size of any Prime Minister, but he seems to be right up there with the bloke he was deputy to in Rudd. And he thinks he's going to be there forever because, oh, no one's ever going to not vote for the Teals. Well, thankfully, Western Australia is a place that can punish this Prime Minister. Punish this Prime Minister for his lies. For his lies about China, for his lies about who was responsible when it comes to the ankle bracelets, for his lies about doing everything he possibly can about cost of living. And I'll tell you why Western Australia really matters to the Prime Minister. Because on election night, it will be the difference between a majority or a minority Labor government. Now, obviously, I hope that the Teals get flushed away and we're talking about a much closer contest, but you've got to be realistic. Normally in Australia, when an independent gets elected, they generally get re-elected to the parliament. There are the odd occasions, like a Karen Phelps, that sort of come and go quickly, but normally when people get a taste of this stuff, they hang on to it because in many ways it's a way of just stepping back from day-to-day politics. But the federal government only has 78 seats in the parliament. You need 76 for a majority. Now, previous governments, like Labor in 2010, had like 90 seats. Howard had more than that. Abbott had as many as that. So he had a backbench to burn. But he doesn't because he only just got over the line and the polls are now saying that his vote is below where he just scraped in. 9 of those seats are in South Australia. 4 of them they won at the last election, so they could afford to lose just 2 of them before we're talking about a minority government. But they could lose all 4. This is being noticed by, among others, the great Philip Khoury, writing in the Australian Financial Review, that this is a problem. for the Prime Minister. Now, Western Australia voted hard no against the Voice. Western Australia can spot the BS coming from the East Coast, including the fly-in, fly-out FIFO Prime Minister, like many Prime Ministers have been. Their last shot at being able to turn a WA person into the Prime Minister, well, that's Kim Beazley a political generation ago. So if Anthony Albanese thinks he's got some sort of magic touch, well, guess what? McGowan ain't there. The current Premier stinks. The current government is awful at the state level. And the people who just scraped over the line because Western Australia had had enough of the previous Liberal government, well, there's every expectation they're not going to go via teal or green. They may well go back to the Liberal Party. The primary vote, according to the polls, is stronger for the Liberal Party than it was in 2022. The preferred Prime Minister numbers are stronger at the moment for Peter Dutton than Albo when he was the opposition leader. So while Albo thinks the best way to communicate with the people of Western Australia is to keep the front page of the local paper happy by grabbing a texter and signing a reporter who literally used to work for his government to pledge no change to the GST, remember, that's Labor Prime Minister, former Labor staffer, now reporter, doing the sales job for the Prime Minister. When, in actual fact, today, a former West Australian Premier, Colin Barnett, was in Canberra. Now, he had argued previously for a better share of GST. Now he's no longer in the game, so he's out there saying that the current deals that are advantageous to WA aren't good. But because of the political standing of Western Australia, every government will always bend over to try to help it out with even more GST because there are that many seats in play. People in Western Australia were promised a government that got it. Instead, they got a government that dumped detainees out of detention with no visas, the wrong visas, no security, ankle bracelets that came off, and the Prime Minister doesn't have the balls to go and visit the woman who was bashed within an inch of her life in part because of the failures of his own government. Fake. Now, speaking of teals, as I was a moment or two before, you know, there's one word lefties use to try to dismiss anything they disagree with.
Misinformation.
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 The misinformation which is there.
Some misinformation.
And this government is trying to censor the internet. Now, remember, they've been trying to censor the internet for months. Now they're trying to pretend that the same piece of legislation will end up also becoming a Trojan horse to ban videos of crimes, hence the fake fight with Elon Musk. But remember, they want to decide what is true, not true, and if you, on your social media, post something they don't think is true, like the lady who was handcuffed in Victoria in her pyjamas, then the social media companies get fined. And of course, if you keep posting things from certain websites, guess what? Those websites won't get shared. It's a way of shutting things down. Well, perfect example about how this term misinformation is used as a shield from people when they are caught red-handed, either doing the wrong thing, saying the exact opposite of what they have promised, or what the actual consequences of their actions are. Zoe Daniel, member for Goldstein. Now, every likelihood is, because she's an ABC lovey, she's one of the high priestesses of the ABC, so she walks on water and that electorate will no doubt return her. Well, she's been in a bit of trouble because a few people have noticed this lady who, of course, rallies against fossil fuel subsidies, etc., took some votes in the parliament that actually resulted in taxpayer money being given to fossil fuel companies. She was confronted with this. Somebody was filming it. The video has now come out via Peter Van Onselen and the Daily Mail. But have a look at what she says before she engages with whether it's something she regrets or not.
This is a good example of misinformation or manipulation of information.
Sorry? Did you or did you not take a vote in the parliament for whatever reason, good, bad or indifferent, that resulted in fossil fuel companies that you rail against, that you constantly fight in order to harness up votes and suck up preferences so you could eventually end up playing the preference game and holding onto your seat. Well, the reality is, yes, she did. In fact, she goes on in the same answer that she turns around and says, oh, misinformation, misinformation, to say the misinformation is actually true.
Yes, that because the government capped gas prices, it compensated the energy companies for their losses in order to pass on cost of living relief to people in the community who couldn't afford to pay their power bills.
These people really pee me off, because they're the people that are going to vote for a piece of legislation which will decide what you get to share or read on the internet. They get to decide whether you get to know if the Prime Minister told a lie yesterday, which he did, a lie the day before, which he did, a lie the day before that, which he did. Because, of course, if the government's setting what truth is, their lie will be declared to be true. People like the Teals and Zoe Daniel will vote for that legislation because they think it's a way of shutting up critics, principally from the centre-right. That's why they're voting for it. Well, again, Peter Van Onselen was the one who actually put all of this out there. Well done to him, doing it at the Daily Mail. At the election, Ms Daniel pledged to cease subsidising fossil fuels, putting the commitment on her website for all to see. However, after voting to do the opposite as part of the energy price relief plan and subsidise energy companies producing fossil fuels, the Teal deleted the pledge, changing it on her website instead to cuts in fossil fuel subsidies to accommodate the backflip. So her promise was, I won't give them subsidies. She votes to give them subsidies. If you point it out, it's misinformation. But then she goes back and changes the record because the left get to mark their own homework. Do not let them censor the internet. Do not fall for their garbage that it's about a better democracy, because by her standards, by the Prime Minister's standards, it's a way of hiding their lies. Now, as you know, uni protests have been going for a while now after the events that have been taking place in the Middle East for many months now. Now, Australian universities have not turned out to be as violent as the nonsense that we saw in the United States in the past couple of weeks. And again, regardless of what your actual view is about what is happening right now in Rafah, where literally Israeli tanks currently making their way through the Gaza Strip, filming to send a message to the world that they will not hold back. They are on the full mission to get rid of Hamas, but we all know an awful lot of people are going to die who are not part of Hamas. They just happen to live in the area where Hamas is currently in control, as elected by the people of Gaza. But let's not pretend that we can't see what we can all see with our own eyes. However, I'm certainly not on the side of Hamas, and I'm certainly not on the side of the protesters that are trying to find excuses for Hamas. I'm just telling you the truth, because that's what you're owed each and every night. Well, as you know, last week in the United States, the university protest thing went nuts. But a couple of protests have now popped up in Australia because, you know, it's really original just to do what they do in the United States because we're all living in one big world, right? Geez, wouldn't you like the American version of the way they pay their university fees as opposed to here where the taxpayer will pay them for you? Oh, no, that's right. We like that about Australia. But we hate Australia because Australia was stolen land. Must be complicated for these people. Well, in the University of Queensland, they have set up one of these so-called camps in support of the people of Palestine. But, of course, there's a not-so-subtle tinge of messages that are in there. Before we go away from this photo, though, just pay attention to the sign. Join the camp, F your classes. The campaign signs of the Greens candidate for the Brisbane Lord City Mayor have been used in this scenario to also then be turned around and used by the university students. So, geez, no crossover between the Greens and some of this nonsense, but that's what you can see. Plenty of other things there again, stolen land, stolen lives, but, geez, thank you, modern Australia, for paying for my university bills. Honestly, these people. Anyway, apparently there was an incident that happened at the University of Queensland. Now, apparently a staff member's office was apparently targeted by somebody who was part of this protest, and they decided to, there's no polite way to do it, but have a little piddle in one of the offices. The Jewish academics office at the University of Queensland was allegedly broken into and urinated in last week, prompting the police to be called and the university launched an internal investigation. Police confirmed officers attended the university's St Lucia campus last Wednesday and escorted a young woman off campus before fining her for trespassing. Now again, this story makes no suggestion of who was responsible for the stain. In Victoria, however, what about this? La Trobe University, yet another one of the far-left organisations that hates everything about Australia, but thanks for the free university education, because they're not going to be earning 50 grand anytime soon to start paying it back like maybe you did, or certainly somebody in your family did. Well, now, La Trobe University staff are being told to essentially treat the protesters like toddlers. Give them what they want. Don't send them into the naughty corner if they come in and disrupt your class. A letter which has come from a senior person at La Trobe University to the people who run classes there each and every day. If protesters enter your class, we would ask that you refrain from intervening and allow them to share their information that they wish to. Now, imagine if this was, again, it's all about free speech. Oh, but Israel allows free speech. No, that's not acceptable. If they stay for longer than 5 minutes, then we will request you notify security. So the rule here is, because they will carry on like toddlers if they get confronted, they can have 5 minutes to walk in, interrupt your class, say whatever they want, by extension, harass certain students, obviously of the Jewish faith, or people who don't agree with them, or the kids who haven't joined the revolution yet. They go on to say that La Trobe supports the rights of students to protest peacefully. Our protest has been peaceful. We've received no reports of concerning behaviours from protesters or disrupting to lecturers to date. We are liaising with protest organisers to enable peaceful and safe protest. They are giving them what they want. Now again, free speech means you can protest. I don't particularly have a problem with if you want to sit down and camp out and make your point, good luck to you. But don't tell me that when you miss class after class after class that it's not going to come back and hurt you with some sort of a suspension or a failure. And if you do start to get up in people's faces, that you should be suspended at the very least, or most likely expelled. Imagine if it was members of footy teams that were running around and taking 5 minutes of your time to say whatever they want as they disrupt your class. You reckon that'd be acceptable? Of course not. Now again, we are all sensitive to what is happening in that part of the world. But if you think disrupting other people going about the studies that they hope to be able to use to earn enough money to actually pay the taxpayer back, then you have no idea what you're doing. None of these people, of course, are camped out the front of the Israeli embassy. None of these people camped out the front of a local UN delegation. None of these people camped out the front of the United States for in part supplying the weapons. None of that. Oh, no. Because we all know what would happen if those things happen. So instead, they turn around and sit on stolen land, knowing that no one's going to move them. Because they're oh so precious and oh so better than the rest of us, with not so tangential links to one particular political party. They even use their posters, flip them around to write their messages. TikTok, as you know, I'm not on it, not interested. I know that it's a way that we could broaden the number of people who watch and see what we do. If you cut it up and send it, you do what you want. But I'm not part of it. Why? Chinese surveillance app. No interest whatsoever in being part of it. And by the way, does everyone honestly think that they're getting 7 trillion views of every single video? Perhaps there's a chance that one of the ways TikTok keeps you on TikTok is by telling you how many extra million people are watching the content that if you post anywhere else, barely 1,000 people watch? Just a hunch. Anyway, last year, we had the whole conversation about whether or not it should be banned from government devices. It, of course, was at the federal level. It was at the state level. So this message went out to all parts of the public service in the New South Wales government. It says, among other things, those who wish to use TikTok on personal devices must ensure no corporate data is there. You are not allowed to use it on New South Wales government devices. Employees are not able to use TikTok on corporate-issued devices or BYO devices. If they access work platforms via browsers or apps or have access to things like Teams or SharePoint, why? Because they could backdoor their way to giving information to the Chinese government. So New South Wales officially has a position of no TikTok in the official halls of power or the bureaucracy. Well, what about this? Tonight, at the New South Wales Parliament House, the very place where the laws get passed and the people have been told not to use TikTok, guess who has used New South Wales Parliament for a networking meeting? Tonight. Yeah, TikTok. The Speaker has said that he was a bit surprised that TikTok had not declared itself when it booked the room for an event. We're not aware of any reference to TikTok in the original request. I do have some questions about how they did it. When people are holding a bit of suspicion about TikTok's involvement in political discussion, mate, you banned it off government phones. Your phone, paid for by the taxpayer. You can't use it for TikTok. But here's the stinger. However, Mr Piper said the event complied with the requirements of a meeting at Parliament House in Macquarie Street and will be allowed to go ahead. So let's imagine if the No campaign at last year's referendum tried to rent any space at the New South Wales Parliament House to run some sort of information or networking session or information session about why people should vote no. Do you reckon someone somewhere would run and dob and there'd be either, at the very least, a conversation, or most likely the event would be shut down, booted, see you later? I don't know, but it's TikTok and it's where all the kids are and we need all the kids to vote for us. So they just let it happen. Meantime, the parent company, ByteDance, of the Chinese surveillance app TikTok, well, they are now challenging the decision which has been made by American lawmakers, signed into law by Joe Biden, that they have to sell the company to an American ownership structure. If they don't do so, well, then apparently the government will be able to take it over, but now this thing is off to the courts. And speaking of the courts, aren't the media excited that Stormy Daniels finally got to say her bit when it came to the court case that's playing out against Donald Trump? Now, remember, though, it's not about whether hush money payments are illegal. It's not about whether or not they spent the night together. The apparent reason that this former president must be brought before the courts was because of how it was all accounted for. But they got grubby today because it's all about embarrassing Trump. And it was even embarrassing the judge, apparently.
He was noticeably uncomfortable as she was going into some of the details.
Now, I'll save you some of the details because you don't deserve to hear some of those details. They're everywhere else. But interesting to see that some people looking back at some of the things that she was sharing or oversharing was actually not good for the prosecution's case.
So he was, according to Daniels, silk or satin pajamas. She said, I made fun of him and said, does Hugh Hefner know you stole his pajamas? I told him to go and change. So he obliged very politely, according to Stormy. Again, Daniels often think that the kind of hotels that we're used to being in, it's a bed and a dresser, but this hotel room was 3 times the size of my apartment.
I'm sorry, the Commodore 64 played the wrong bit. But they're very excited. She's still on the stand. She will be on the stand again in cross-examination tonight. You'll see all the details through the middle of the night or with Pete in the morning. Make sure you check it out on First Edition. Quick break back with Stephen Conroy, Bronwyn Bishop, Albo, China and Too Many Lies. Plus, Nigel Farage. We're just getting started. Fired up tonight. So let's get into it. All right, you know all the issues. Let's not muck around. Nigel Farage a bit later in the show, but how's this? Heavy hitters, and we love them. None other than Stephen Conroy, former Labor Senator, former Liberal Senator, Liberal MP, Speaker of the House, and so much more. Carryover champ, Bronwyn Bishop. Bronwyn, the Prime Minister gets caught lying again about the interaction with China. Oh, everyone was told about it. Every level of ministry, yet it's pretty obvious none of that took place. His response to what seemed like a particularly dangerous escalation, and these things have been building for a while, just his blood pressure doesn't go above sleeping rate.
Well, he is President Xi's handsome boy.
Of course.
But he's also the liar in the lodge. I mean, the man indicated that the ministers were going to speak to each other, that he would speak to Xi, at least that the ambassador would be called in and dressed down for what was a very dangerous and really tempting fate in that if it had gone really wrong, what would have been the next step?
That's the reporting.
That's the really question. But you can't believe a word this man says. The fact of the matter is that he simply has accepted his role as the head of a vassal state as far as he's concerned, and all he wants is that when the election comes, the Communist Party of China will send messages out to the diaspora that's here in Australia.
Well, Stephen, there was a rather significant change in the diaspora's vote at the last election, wasn't there?
Oh, my God. Look, there are two people who you should never take diplomatic advice from. One's Bronwyn and one's me. But Bronwyn went from 0 to 500 there with not a fact in sight. She made some assertions about what she claimed the Prime Minister said. I've been following this issue closely, Paul, as you know. I haven't heard the Prime Minister say any of the things that Bronwyn just claimed to say. I think you've pointed...
He said at every level.
No, I didn't.
He said at every level.
But he said every level, and then the report is Bronwyn, it's not every level. That's my point tonight.
So I repeat, Paul made some good points. Bronwyn just made some factless points. So on the core issue
and you're making
about how to deal with the Chinese government, no. So on the core issue on how to deal with China, they could not give a stuff what Australia says.
I didn't realise that you were
very, very clear about this. Well, like you, Bronwyn, I've spent a lot of time studying these issues. But on the core point, China don't care what Australia say or think. They'll play us on a break whenever they can. So the most substantive thing that Australia can do is to continue, as we have been doing, opposing their coercion and bribery in the Pacific Islands, working to build the alliance network across the Indo-Pacific, whether it's with India, Philippines, Indonesia.
Listen.
I'm asking Stephen.
Well, you should absolutely, should absolutely protest. And I mean, the Prime Minister's words were very clear. And just in case you're wondering if you want to see a comparison about how would, say, the US describe it, the US described it publicly in exactly the same way. So I don't think we're going to take advice from the Liberal Party about foghorn diplomacy designed to try, unfortunately for them and fail, curry votes in Australia.
But isn't this how China wins every time?
Absolutely.
No one pushes back, and if you do push back, it's accused of being foghorn.
Absolutely.
The words were used.
Define Australia pushing back. What do you actually suggesting Australia do?
Chinese Premier, then until they say, sorry, you're not allowed to come here, you can't, well, you're not invited in June. That's what I'd say.
Well, the way diplomacy works, I'm not a fan of it. Let's be very clear, I repeat, I'm not the person you put in charge of chatting to anyone, that's not a friend of ours diplomatically, and I think Bronwyn would be in the same camp, OK? So you actually have to have a level of dialogue. It's probably a unity ticket. But let's not pretend how this world works. It's not a world I want to be in.
This is how it works under Albanese.
Let's not pretend. No, that's how it works when
how do we push?
The last government,
for starters,
you
the
push
ambassador should
by
have been
consistently raising it.
That's point number one. Where's Penny Wong? Where's her statement?
Yeah, cool.
We've got the language that's used, unprofessional and unacceptable. That's what you'd say about a junior in the office who wrote a bad letter.
We know where the foghorn diplomacy, the plain domestic politics, which you thought would help you, it didn't.
The domestic politics is not to offend the Chinese diaspora in this country.
No, let's be clear. We have a public defence document that identifies China as a clear and present danger to us. We have an alliance network that we're building across the Indo-Pacific to deal specifically with, I know the government doesn't say it out loud, but let's be clear, to deal specifically with China.
We've got a Deputy Prime Minister that said in a speech that we welcomed, he said, got his speech checked with the ambassador, Chinese ambassador, and then said in China that we welcome investment from China into the Pacific Island states. This is a man who speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He's the one who first used the words unprofessional and unacceptable, and then Albanese simply mimics them. There is no leadership, Stephen. That is the problem. No
Americans
leadership.
described it the same way. Okay, I mean,
no, I'm sorry. You expect me to think
the approach
Biden does
this
it right?
government take is a professional.
For heaven's sake.
That takes a professional. Like, Bronwyn, look, here's a hint. No one in the Labor Party and outside of your small group of friends is taking advice from you on how to manage diplomatic matters. Nobody.
Nobody's taking it from you either.
They're certainly not taking it from you.
They're certainly not taking it from the Prime Minister. They're certainly not taking it from the Prime Minister.
So what you actually do if you want to push back against China is not run off at the mouth, Bronwyn style.
But how do you push back? Because
you build
it feels
alliances,
like
you build defence.
It feels like, you send a letter and hope they don't read it. You make a call and hope it goes to voicemail. And then when they come out, you roll out the red carpet and go, what a friend. What a friend we are.
They're your description. We are building up our defence capability. We are building alliances.
Yes.
We're active on the ground in the Pacific to stop their coercion. Okay, they're the things you're actually doing, and every single one of those, every Australian, every single one of those, every Australian understands is about managing to improve our position, work with our allies, so that we are able to say to China, enough is enough.
No, Stephen. When the Prime Minister came out and said what was lacking before was there wasn't communication. Now it's wonderful. We've got communication with China and we say nothing. Maybe when Premier Lee comes in June, I might raise it with him. I mean, what sort of leadership is that? Even you can't excuse it.
All right, I got to jump.
Sorry,
Stephen,
they were just saying we had to go. Sorry, sorry, they were saying we had to go there. I'm happy to keep going, but they said we've got to close.
We do. Thank you. I appreciate it. Everyone hosting and everyone fighting. We'll do it again next week. And I'll make sure it's a little longer next time as well. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. Quick break, back with more. Nigel Farage is standing by. That's why we're going to wrap it up, because we're going to have a chat to the great man. So much is happening in the UK. The Conservatives absolutely stuffed. Will his party make a big impact? And of course, Trump and Stormy and the media going nuts. More in a second. Nigel Farage is the man that we love to talk to each and every week, and I'm pleased to say that he knows what's coming, which is Conservative voters want to go anywhere but the Tories, because every single by-election or local council election or election for dog catcher or whatever happens there, they lose, and they lose by bigger margins. Great man, lovely to see you. So Reform is your party. We've talked about the system where essentially first past the post does make the system difficult, but do you think there's going to be a scenario where you're going to be able to get in front of the Tories in a few seats?
I do, yes, and it's happening already. In fact, we had a whole series of elections that took place last Thursday, local district elections, one parliamentary by-election in which Reform were only 100 votes behind the Conservatives, albeit with Labour way out in front. And districts in the north of England where Reform is already ahead of the Conservatives and therefore the challenger to Labour. So something very big looks like it's going on. What is for certain is the Tories are toast. They are gone. It's over. In fact, many of their former voters literally hate them for what they've done and for their breach of promises. Labour are going to form the next government. So what this is really all about is what will the centre-right of British politics look like in a couple of years' time? And I think Reform are going to become a very major player.
Forgive me if there is a blood feud, you don't speak to each other, you suit each other, and there's a reason you don't talk, but I'm going to ask it anyway, right? Could you please tell me there's a plan for a 2-hour debate between you and George Galloway? Because I want to see these two blokes full of fire, taking on each other and talking in a way that I think people would see Sunak and Starmer as these sort of, benign, but two blokes that are boots and all. Is it going to happen? Could it happen?
It could. It's possible. I mean, George is one of the most articulate speakers in modern times. And there are causes with which I agree with George. Where I struggle is that his voters are voting on Gaza, not on what's happening in the United Kingdom. And so I see his brand of politics as being sectarian and dangerous. Well, there's a good start to any debate. So let's see what happens.
Yeah. Well, look, I hate to sort of add the theatrics to this, right? But, you know, you're very good at your soccer crowds of controlling and keeping them apart. So let's get half of it Reform, half of it Workers' Party, you guys in the middle, and I want to hear the cheering and the booing. That would be fun to watch. There'd be water cannons. Yeah, water cannons might be provided by someone. So Stormy Daniels finally takes to the stand. The judge was absolute to the prosecutors. How dirty is this going to get? And guess what? It got dirty. Of course, if this case is about anything, and we all know it's just about embarrassing the president and getting a conviction, it's about the accounting of payments. Why do we need to know about pyjamas and all the rest of the stuff that all the lefties just scooped up and spat out in as sort of dirty fan fiction?
Well, most of what she said yesterday was completely irrelevant to the case. This is about, was she paid a sum of money? Did the Trump Organization account for it correctly? And if they didn't, that would be a misdemeanor, and no more than that under American law. But if that misdemeanor was used to cover up what should have been election expenses, then it becomes a crime. I mean, it's all a pretty difficult route through to understand. Yeah, she, of course, sensationalised everything, came up with a whole load of details that had nothing to do with the case whatsoever. And whilst the judge did tick her off once or twice, he should have been much firmer than he was. But, of course, you know, we know he's a Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? We're going to jail the former president for what he writes in his own social media thing, but she can just keep going and going and going because, again, it's about trying to move all the obvious needles. Last one here. So, Prince William and the King, we know there was the attempt, Prince Harry and the King. Prince Harry, of course, did meet with him in and around the most nervous times around his cancer, but now they're within miles of each other, close kilometres, but they ain't meeting up anytime soon.
No, that's right. Prince Harry's at St Paul's Cathedral today. It's 10 years of the Invictus Games. And the King is opening up Buckingham Palace to thousands of people this afternoon who'll be going to one of the royal garden parties, which I've got to tell you are wonderful afternoons. And the King can't meet his son because he's got scheduling issues. Well, I tell you what, that's the King putting down the firmest public marker we've yet seen. You are not welcome, you treacherous little brat.
Well said. The garden party, of course, does not go for 24 hours. There are 24 hours in the day. There is a window if they want. But quite correctly, the dad just goes, you know what? No, because I know what you're going to do with this information. I know what you're going to do with, is he healthy? Is he baggy eyes? All the rest of it, right? We all know what he'll do. Thank you so much, Nigel. I love your show on GB News. People in Australia can see it on Flash or, of course, YouTube, podcast, all the rest of it. But you versus George, the O2 Arena even. I'm building the crowds. They're gathering as we speak. You know, money to charity, of course. Thank you, mate. Appreciate it. Nigel Farage there in London. The only time you'll see him on Aussie Telly is with us each and every week, and I really do appreciate it. I look forward to that chat each and every week. Megyn Kelly, week off, so we'll get to her next week. Quick break, back with more. The Late Debate, about 5 minutes from now here on Paul Murray Live. Now, one of the joys of being on this side of the TV screen is you obviously know what's coming up on the other shows, and you get to see moods people are in, and generally people are in a good mood. Liz Storer tonight is in a very good mood. Oh, she's cooking with gas. She's ready to go, right? Like, you know, she's ready to rip. Because there's a little bit of news around today, which if you know Liz Storer, you know Liz Storer wants to talk about. If you know James McPherson, he's going to talk about. And if you know Caleb Bond, he really wants to talk about as well. Sometimes the news is specific to a show. And tonight, it's the Late Debate, which is on right now.